Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to our highly anticipated webinar on avoiding OKR icebergs, navigating failure points for smooth sailing. Good to see all of you joining us today. I'm hoping few more attendees for our today's session, so we can just wait a couple of minutes for them to join and then we can proceed. Okay, folks, thanks for waiting. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to yet another webinar from Synergita. We bring expert views, opinions, industry best practices, and practical tips on OKR, PMS, and latest HR trends. I am Mashima, your webinar host, and I'm thrilled to present an exciting lineup of insights and expertise just for you. Now, let me just give you a brief about the motivation behind today's session. In the ever-evolving landscape of goal setting and performance measurement, OKRs have emerged as a guiding light for success businesses striving to achieve their strategic ambitions. However, just like a ship navigating treacherous water, the journey towards successful OKR implementation is not without its challenges. This session will definitely serve as a compass, helping you steer clear of the hidden pitfalls and failure points that can hinder your organization's progress. Together, we will delve into these strategies, insights, and real world experiences that will empower you to set a course for smoother, more successful OKR journeys. So let's embark on this exploration of knowledge, learn from the mistakes of the past, and chart a course towards a future where OKR propel us forward, unimpeded by the lurking icebergs of failures with none other than Roger Longden.
Hi, Mashima.
Yeah, with a solid foundation of 15 years in all things commercial and operational in IT infrastructure, Roger set up the performance coaching consultancy there we joined back in 2010. Since then, he has led TBG in building a reputation for their no-nonsense approach in helping client organizations to cut through the noise so that they can systematically focus on achieving their strategic ambitions in ever more inclusive and innovative ways. Over the past 13 years, he has led projects which have helped clients such as TalkTalk, Guys and St. Thomas, NHS Foundation, Magenta Living and ITV, and international clients such as the University of Auckland, Banco Galicia in Argentina, Amadeus and UBS to all improve their strategic flow. He was the author of the TBG methodology and published the OKR Coaches Handbook in 2021 and the host of the world's longest running OKR podcast, Giant Talk. Now, before moving ahead, I have few housekeeping instructions for all the attendees. In case of any questions, please type them in the chat window located beside the presentation panel. We have already received several questions from the registrants, which will be answered by the speaker during Q&A session. We will continue to collect more questions during this session as we receive and will try answer them during today's session. In case if you do not receive answer to your question today, we'll certainly receive answer via mail very shortly. Thank you for your participation and enjoy the session.
I started to look at it and I looked at, there was very few sort of software. We're talking about 2016 here. So there was very few sort of software systems in the marketplace at that point, and connected with a couple of them, and just as it grew from there, and I was able, because I already had a client base, I was able to kind of start using OKRs and with those clients, and just to kind of test them out and just sort of play with them a bit and so on and so forth, and it's just grown from there. You know, working with small startup and sort of early stage funded businesses here in Manchester in the UK, which is where I am. We've got outside London, we've got the second biggest startup economy for technology businesses in the UK. And so there's always, you know, businesses that are facing rapid growth, and the leaders, the founders of those businesses are often struggling with trying to kind of manage that growth, in terms of technology, in terms of organization, in terms of people, and there's a million and one reasons as to why, you know, strategy should just get forgotten about, because there's just, you know, very, very immediate day-to-day pressures and challenges that are screaming for attention. And so that's why OKRs came into play, and just built it up from there. And the podcast came along because it's about, I think the podcast started in 2019, and by that point we'd started to work with larger organizations, not quite into corporates, but certainly organizations of 200, 300, 400 people that were predominantly software organizations at that point, and they would often still founder-led, but they were much more comprehensive and much more complex as organizations, and often as well spread across a couple of countries. And so they were starting to definitely face challenges, far more complexity around the execution of strategy, not just, you know, having to deal with day-to-day priorities. And so we started to develop a more mature approach to OKRs. And that's when I thought, right, okay, I think we're at a point now where we've got some valuable insights and expertise to share. So it started off from that point of view, and it's continued to run every week. Since then, and we aim to get an episode out once every fortnight, which we seem to be managing.
That's truly inspiring. As I already said, you know, your podcast has undoubtedly left a significant impact on individuals and organizations. Now let's hop to our main course. So, Roger, I would like to understand I would like to get some of your insights into how organizations have seen a boost in employee engagement and motivation through the successful use of OKRs.
Yeah, so great question. When we look for evidence of impact of OKRs, excuse me, it's often quite difficult to find specific data that you can pinpoint, you know, and say it was OKRs that did that. And probably the only area where you can kind of draw the strongest connection is in engagement data, how people are responding to strategy, and how connected they feel to it, how much influence they feel they have on it, how much they feel they can make a contribution towards it. And I'm currently working with an organization, very large corporate organization across many different countries, and they have quite a sophisticated employee engagement surveying mechanism, routine, and so on. So they have a lot of data that we could look at, and we were able to pinpoint where certain areas of the business had kind of adopted OKRs and used them in their briefings, and then started to help their people and their teams to adopt them. And we could see an increase, a definite increase, particularly after the town hall meetings around clarity around strategy, and the level of buy-in and support to what was being presented to them. So you can start to see the more immediate impact of I suppose clarity and transparency that OKRs can bring if they're done well. And it's going to be good to see how that trend continues. But yeah, that's you know, you ask for insights into how. This is where I've seen it, and it's been as a result of kind of just starting to go. Instead of talking about what the strategy is, they talk about what the strategy is, and then they say, as a result of that, this is what our OKRs are, which then create a really strong, really focused spotlight to say, you know, it's not leaving it up to the teams to kind of interpret it for themselves. They've got a really clear sort of focus as to what the direction of travel is if we're going to be embarking on that particular strategy that's set out for them. So yeah, that's where I've seen really good breakthroughs.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how employee engagement improves with OKRs. But I also want to know, in your experience, how has successful OKR implementation transformed the way team collaborate and work towards shared objectives?
Yeah, so one of the clients here in the UK that we worked with a couple of years ago, Talk, big broadband telecommunications company. We had some real breakthroughs with those guys because they were, before we came, when they were just working with typical sort of standard MBO approaches, they were taking a very hierarchical, very functionally aligned approach to the cascade of objectives through the organization. And so consequently, you ended up with different areas with sometimes competing objectives. And so there'd be, a bit of conflict, a bit of friction. And where that was most apparent was between products and sales teams. So sales would have a target for selling a product, which product the product teams hadn't necessarily finished developing. And so sales were getting stressed that they had nothing to sell, and products were saying, it's not our top priority, therefore we'll do it when we get around to it. And you can imagine what was happening. When we brought in OKRs for them, we helped them structure in line with the kind of flow of value through the organization. And value flows like water down a hill. It'll always find a path. Yeah, it'll find its own route. And that's what helped them kind of get their head out of this kind of functional cascade to actually allow the OKRs to follow the value flow through the organization. And that's where we had, as a result, some collaborative team OKRs that were built up that included both product and sales. So they'd be meeting regularly around a shared goal that they both had. And it massively helped them understand each other's perspective and each other's priorities far more. And so where there was previously friction, there was now much, much stronger collaboration. And I can't emphasize strongly enough just how important that horizontal alignment, that horizontal that collaboration needs to be. So building shared OKRs that sit across functions is super important, and make sure that it follows the flow of value through the organization.
Yeah, as you said, proper goal alignment and clarity are fundamental to OKR successes. Without alignment, team may work at cross purposes, and without clarity, objectives become very vague. Also, I want to understand, what are some common failure points organizations encounter when implementing OKRs?
First thing is, I'm I know you guys have a software system that's very good, but actually one of the biggest mistakes that we've seen is that organizations think that just having a software system is enough. And having the system doesn't change anything. It's how you use that system that changes it. So
Absolutely.
it's fine. Bring in, I mean, we advocate that you use a software system every single time, unless it's just one team individually that's working with OKRs, in which case you could probably just about get away with a spreadsheet. But as soon as there becomes more than just one team, then you absolutely need to use a system. But it's quite remarkable. Even some corporates I've been into who have basically been sold a system, and they've tried to deploy it, and 6 to 12 months later, they're in a complete mess, because what they haven't done is they haven't stopped to think about how they're going to use it, and what the level of skill and competence it needs to be to kind of get everybody using OKRs in the same way. So that's a very common pitfall, And the other common pitfall, I kind of just touched upon it in my previous answer, but I'll kind of expand on it a bit more. I talked about the cross-functional OKRs. So the common pitfall that we see time and time again is that the organizations try to use OKRs in the same way that they've used MBOs for many, many years. So they'll go, right, these are our strategic objectives, and therefore what can each function do? What can sales do? What can finance do? What can operations do? What can, marketing do? And you end up with a load of functionally aligned, siloed OKRs, in which case nothing's changed. Nothing's changed from how it was before. So the key, it's all to do with the question that you ask. So you've got your strategic OKRs, and you ask, okay, what is it that we need to work on to progress, to make progress against the strategic OKRs? You don't mention anything about functions, and you look at what the strategic priorities need to be at that next level down, what they translate to. And then you start to say, right, who is it we need to work on this one and this one and this one? And so that's how you build up your cross-functional teams. And I would say those are probably the two biggest pitfalls which I've seen. I'll give you a third one quickly: lack of sponsors from leadership. Lack of sponsor from leadership. If the leadership are not prepared to be seen, to be practicing what they want everybody else to do as well, then it just won't work. And we've had clients who've come to us, and believe it or not, the CEO's read Measure What Matters and has just handed the book to someone and said, I want to do this, go make it happen, and has expected that person to just kind of do it to the whole organization, and it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It has to be sponsored and practiced and role models by leadership as well. So there you go, you got three.
Absolutely. Firstly, I would, like to say that, yeah, you were right that it's not just the software, but the human part behind them. It be any software, OKR or any software, but it's the human part that runs and, that actually make the software efficient. Also, implementing OKRs can be challenging, and some common failure points include setting unrealistic objectives, failing to involve employee in the process, as you said, and lacking regular check-ins. However, one significant challenge is the presence of misconceptions and myths about OKRs. Are there any misconceptions or myths about OKR that contribute to failure points, Roger? And how can organization address and dispel these misconceptions?
Yeah, so another great question. Misconceptions, I would say the first one is, don't think, and I've seen people assume it, that just because you write your objectives as OKRs, that it's going to change anything. It's not. It isn't. It's about how you use them. It's fine having them, but it's how you put them to work after that. And the big difference between OKRs and any other MBO approaches that have been used previously is that OKRs are far more current, far more visible, far more frequent around discussion than any form of MBOs have been in previous years. So I would say that's a big misconception. And how can organizations address and dispel that? Well, I mentioned earlier, it's about pausing to actually just give some thought to kind of working out what the governance needs to be around how you're using those OKRs. And all right, governance is a bit of a corporate term, but talking about a smaller organization, it's just kind of thinking, what are the habits and what are the routines we want to build? I talked earlier about how I'm working with an organization of over 15,000 people. I was actually talking to a charity of just 5 people this morning as well. And obviously what they need from us is far less than the organization of 15,000, but they were still asking, what do we do to make this different to how we've used our goals in the past? And so even though it's only going to take us an hour and a half to design their, come up with their routines and their habits, which and the cycles that they want to stick to, it still needs some thought. It still needs to be done, because just writing them and having them changes nothing.
Yes, absolutely. Misconceptions can be detrimental, and I believe in reality, OKRs should be adaptable to evolving circumstances. Educating teams on these aspects and fostering a culture of open communication can help overcome these misconceptions. Now, I would also like to understand how crucial is proper goal alignment and clarity in preventing OKR related failures.
So goal alignment's really important because it's that golden thread that helps those that are contributing, those that are involved, understand the importance of their contribution to the bigger goal and the bigger picture. That's really important. And without that, what you end up with is you kind of hoping that at the next level down they get it and you leave them to it and they create something, and it may or may not be the right thing. It might not. It might have the right focus or it might not. And so the way that you go about building up goal alignment without, and this is really important, without writing, leaders or managers writing goals for teams and handing them out because that's what, that supports my goal, so therefore this is yours, because that's completely disempowering. And who's to say that the manager or the leader has the right idea in the first place? They know what needs to be done, but they might not have the best idea about how to do it. They might not be a subject matter expert. They probably aren't, to be honest. So this is where OKRs, it's really important to view them as a way to enable and empower rather than control. So, to just write them and hand them down is control. So the way you build up alignment without control, without being controlling, is to illustrate and help those that need to align into the next level of OKRs, what those OKRs are, what they're focused on, make sure that everything's clearly understood, and then allow them the space with which to come up with the ideas and work on those and develop a set of draft OKRs, which they would then propose as the next ones that, the next ones that align up into that higher level OKR. And then for the owner of that higher level OKR to take a look at them and say, yeah, I think they would be really good, or maybe they need tweaking here and there. But the point is that you're empowering them to come up with the draft for themselves, okay? And that's really, really important. That's really important. And you talk about OKR related failures. I would argue that a failure is writing them and handing them down, because you're only just going to get whatever it is that the manager thinks should be done the way that they think it should be done. And like I said, there's no guarantee that they know the best way. They don't know. They don't necessarily have all the ideas, and you'll never really see innovation and new thinking and new practice come to the fore unless that space is given and that permission is given for the teams to kind of come up with the ideas and then refine those into OKRs for themselves.
Yes, indeed, as you said, goal alignment is the golden thread, indeed crucial, and also the way you build an alignment with the objectives, regular check-ins, and cross-functional collaborations are essential to maintain alignment. Tools and platforms that visualize alignment can also greatly assist in keeping everyone on the same very page. How can organizations now can ensure that their OKRs are aligned across different levels and teams to avoid misdirection?
Yeah, so some of this comes back to what I was saying earlier, design this to start off with. So be clear about the levels that you're going to have and what the purpose of the OKRs are at each level, broadly speaking, what they're going to focus on, and, who's likely to be in scope for working on them. And then, excuse me, aligned across. It's the point about the allow the flow of value and use the OKRs to kind of create and map that flow of value through the organization. So instead of kind of going into that hierarchical thinking and that hierarchical cascade allow the OKRs to effectively map out the value flows in the organization. That's what they should easily flow onto. And if you can do that, then that makes sure that you get the collaboration, because you're looking at the flow of value rather than particular teams or particular functions. And to avoid misdirection, well, again, if you're following the value flow, then you're using them to track the building of that value to the ultimate point where it delivers to the client, or it delivers to whichever other stakeholder is to receive it.
Yes. Also, Roger, metrics play a very vital role in OKR progress. What mistakes do organizations commonly make when selecting metrics for their objectives?
Oh, yeah, metrics. We spend quite a long time talking about metrics at the start of an OKR implementation, because there's different types of metrics, and it's about knowing when to use the different types at the particular times and so on. So in terms of selecting metrics, I would say what we tend to find is, once a client understands the difference, and there's three primary metrics really, or types of metric, once they understand which metric suits which scenario, then they're okay with it. The challenge is getting them to use a metric in the first place. Okay, because and I've seen this recently in this in this large corporate that I'm working with at the moment. They have been using OKRs without any sort of consistent approach. There have been different managers, different leaders that have decided they'll just try them out, and so they've got lots of different ways of writing them and scoring them and tracking them and reporting them. It's a real mess, which is why we're working with them now. But the interesting thing is that a lot of the key results are written just as actions. So it's not just selecting the type of metric. It's about getting them to select a metric in the first place, and work on that basis, work with that. And sometimes it's because there's a kind of there hasn't been a shift to that sort of outcome focused mindset, and we need to kind of work on kind of mentoring them through that. But other times it can be because there's a fear. There's a fear because as soon as you put a metric on it, it becomes much more transparent around performance. There's no room for ambiguity. There's no room for interpretation. You either do it or you don't do it.
Yeah, metrics are essential, but organizations, as you said, indeed should have the knowledge and that how and where to use them. But also, I would like to know, how can organizations strike the right balance between quantitative and qualitative measurements in their OKRs?
So, great question that kind of builds on my last one. Qualitative measurements should only be used in the where there is no data available. And when you look at it, that's becoming increasingly rare. And sometimes we see qualitative measurements, is what we would call milestone key results, used to help establish that data. Okay, so maybe in the first quarter, you have a milestone key result that charts the progress towards building up that data, building a baseline from which we will measure performance, and setting the key results a quantitative key result for the next quarter. So in terms of a right balance, our counsel around this is, well, there's kind of like a hierarchy to the three types. Lagging, which is the ultimate measure of impact, because you're measuring evidence of impact, because it's about what happens after something's been released or published or happened or has been done. It's about what will be seen as a result of that. The lagging measures are absolutely the most valuable. Leading measures are still quantitative, but they are indicators that you're on the right track. So release or publish hasn't happened yet, but it shows that they're on the right track. In the absence of, like I say, data, then we fall back on milestone key results. They should be used really, really judiciously, and only used absolutely where there is the absence of data available. So, you know, that's the counsel that we give to clients, to sort of give them the right, help them strike the right balance.
Right, Roger, but balancing quantitative and qualitative measurement is indeed a challenge, is what I believe. OKR often focuses on non-financial outcomes. How can organizations effectively measure and communicate these qualitative achievements to their stakeholders?
See, that's an interesting one, and in some respects, I mean, non-financial outcomes doesn't mean to say there isn't any data available, because finance is not the only data. Financial data is not the only data. So I'd actually kind of gently challenge on this one, because what we see, and I've just come off the call with a client that's, you know, we were trying to define what is the ultimate measure of value creation for the organization. I'm actually doing some KPI work with them, not OKRs. But they were able to come up with a measure which was still quantitative, even though it is something which societal stakeholders are going to be measuring or judging the organization's success by, and it's not financial. I mean, they're a charity, so that it's not really surprising that they're not financial, but it's an impact measure. And so what I would say here is that those non-financial outcomes for stakeholders, just because they may not need financial data doesn't mean to say that they can't be qualitative, because quantitative, because they're using data brought from other sources. And I certainly would challenge a client very strongly to make sure that anything that they report to stakeholders is based upon data. I wouldn't like to see a milestone key result get to that point, get to that level, because usually those are used as an enabler to get to the point where we've got data available that we can report against. So I guess my challenge there is, you know, any report to stakeholder, I believe, should be based upon quantitative key results.
Yeah, but building adaptability into the OKR framework involves regularly reviewing and adjusting objectives to align with changing circumstances. It also requires a culture that embraces change and encourages team to be agile and responsive. Now, change is constant in today's business landscape, we all know. Then how can organizations build adaptability into their OKR framework to handle unforeseen challenges?
That's a really good question, because, and I'm sure you've seen, you know, that it's you can have a plan, you can have your OKR set, and then something comes in and it kind of blows them out of the water, or certainly challenges whether they are right. So how can you build it into your OKR framework. So it's about striking the balance between not just changing because something has become challenging, and just and changing, deciding on a change, settling on a change because it's absolutely warranted. And usually that's if there's a significant opportunity or threat that's emerged. And then there's a decision, there's kind of a decision tree that you go through, you know, can this wait till the end of the current quarter, or do we need to jump on it now? If it can't wait, then we need to just look at it now. If it can, obviously you wait till the end of the quarter. Although we've seen more 12-month OKRs have to be revised or refocused or rewritten than quarterlies. Quarterlies tend to run the term, but a number of our clients have opted to kind of have like a 6-month check-in point. So they, especially the ones that have a fairly defined strategic planning process already, and because they often will start on their strategic planning for the next financial year, typically 6 months before year end starts, it's a good point at which to kind of have a natural review point for the current set of OKRs as well. Are they still fit for purpose? Are the current 12-month ones still fit for purpose and pointing in the right direction? So it's nothing more sophisticated really than just making sure that you build points into your framework where you ask the question, and then if the belief is that they would benefit from some revision, then you revise on that basis. But again, like I say, it should be not because they've become hard and difficult, but because there's something shifted, something's changed, an opportunity or a threat that means if we don't do this, it's going to be a big risk to the organization, or the organization is going to miss out on something.
Also, ensuring that everyone understands how their work ties into larger OKR involves clear goals, regular updates, and providing context. It's about creating a narrative that connects individual and team efforts to overarching objectives, and indeed, communication is the key. Now, what role does transparent communication play in avoiding failure point in OKR implementation?
Yeah, so transparency is massively important, not just in the OKRs themselves, but you ask in particular in relation to an implementation here. And OKRs represent quite a significant change for many organizations. They bring with them a number of cornerstone principles which are which really kind of what makes them different to how MBOs have been used in the past. And so therefore, and the key word was change there, you need to manage the change, and you need to be communicating and communicating and then communicating even more on top of that, because you've got some people who will absolutely get it and embrace it. You've got some people who will be, yeah, it's just the next it's the next initiative, and I'll see how long it lasts. And then you've got others that will be, really, really against it. And it's not unusual, and we've seen this at all levels, right from junior level right up to senior C-suite level, for some people to go, sorry, I can't work like this, I'm out, and they leave. Fine, okay, this maybe because they're not comfortable with the transparency, maybe they're not comfortable with the degree of empowerment which they bring with them, that they're more about command and control. Okay, well, I'm sorry, but that's not going to last with when working with OKRs. So the role that transparent communication plays is really key. You've got to be able to start off by setting a vision for what it'll be like when OKRs are in place for us and working really well. How's that going to be different to how things have been in the past for us? And what that will mean for us, how it's going to benefit those in the organization. So in other words, the what's in it for them, how it's going to make their life better, easier, faster, whatever matters most to them, and then mobilizing around OKRs and making sure that people feel like they're not being thrown at them, that they are being given the support and the time to sort of get their head around them and get used to them. And then looking for those green shoots of success. So where you see perhaps in the first quarter, a team that's really grasped them and they've done really well, that you make that visible and you reinforce it and recognize it and communicate it out to the organization. And it's really important that the leadership play their role here, because they should be, they're the ones that sit across the organization. So they are the ones that should be reporting to the rest of the organization through town halls or all hands or whatever, that that this is the progress we're making with our OKRs, and this is the impact that we're seeing our OKRs have, because we're seeing our engagement scores go from this to this. So yeah, that's what I would say around transparent communication for it.
Yeah, Roger, transparent communication is at the core of adaptability, and not in just the OKR, but in even smaller relationships. When unforeseen challenges arises, open and honest communication ensures that everyone is aware of the situation. Teams can also pivot and adjust their OKRs accordingly when there is transparent and clear communication. Regular check-ins, status updates, and flexibility to modify OKRs as needed all hinge on transparent communication. But how can organization ensure that team and individual have a clear understanding of how their work contributes to larger OKR achievements?
Yeah, so this comes back to the golden thread point which I made earlier. So it's really important that when a team updates their OKR, especially when it gets to the end of a quarter, and that's usually when the output and the achievements that a child, we talk about parent-child OKRs, that a child OKR has had, then is rolled up to the parent one, and we say, right, okay, as a result of all that's been done and what's been achieved in the current quarter at the child level, what does that mean at the parent level? And it's really important for that team been working at child level to see what impact it's had on the parent one, so they can see, they directly see what impact they've had. And that's important for the learning as well, because if, God forbid, if there's if something hasn't quite worked, or maybe even if it was an experiment, which is absolutely an absolute possibility, that they were testing something out and it hasn't necessarily had the impact upon the parent OKR that they expected, then there needs to be learning in that. So it's really important for the teams to be able to see and have communicated to them really clearly what the impact of their outcomes and achievements have been on the one that they're feeding into, on the parent OKR that they're feeding into.
Yeah, Roger. Measuring and communicating qualitative achievements is crucial for demonstrating the value of OKRs. Also, as you already discussed, without proper transparent communication, one can never excel in their objectives. Coming to the leadership part, leadership buy-in is crucial for successful OKR implementation. What guidance can you offer to leaders to foster a culture of OKR alignment and commitment?
So, good grief, there's quite a bit here. What I would say is, I've already mentioned the change management, so I won't dwell on that too much, but it is something which can't be lost sight of. It really has to. You can't just expect people just to take them on. There has to be, good communication, understanding around what's important to them and aligning it with that, and so on and so forth. The other thing that I would say that's really important at leadership level, besides the role modeling, which again I've already mentioned, so I won't dwell on, is ensuring that there is a healthy level of psychological safety in the organization. So, you mentioned about a culture of OKR alignment and commitment. When you're building the OKRs, when you're developing the OKRs, and I mentioned before parent and child, if you've got a parent OKR and then it's about developing the next one at child level, and you take that empowering approach and say, this is the parent, so therefore what ideas have you got that we could develop into OKRs at the child level? If people don't feel safe enough to make suggestions, put ideas forward, then you're not going to get much. It's going to be a very difficult process, and they'll probably just be suggesting what's there already, or very, very little change. There'll be nothing earth-shattering. There'll be nothing game-changing that will come out, because that's too much of a risk. It's too much of a risk. So therefore, there needs to be a healthy level of psychological safety so that people can put those ideas forward, and you can then have a healthy and respectful conversation around them. So they know that they're not going to get shot down, they're not going to get criticized, they're not going to get berated for putting forward, that crazy idea, because sometimes those crazy ideas can be refined into absolute wonders. And that's where the innovation comes from. So that's why it's really important to have this level of psychological safety in the organization. And leaders can do a lot, because again, they can role model this, and they can set the example, set the temperature. If it's common practice for leaders to not listen, leaders to not show respect, leaders not to challenge in a constructive way, then the chances are the levels of psychological safety will be fairly low, because people will be keeping themselves safe and they won't want to speak up or make those suggestions, because they don't feel that that they will be received well, and they feel that it will count against them. So the third one I would say here is psychological safety. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Roger. As you said, leadership buy-in starts with setting the example. Role modeling and healthy level of psychological safeties are very important. But I believe that leaders should actively participate in the OKR process, demonstrate commitment to achieve OKRs, and communicate the strategic importance of OKRs to the organizations, so that their subordinates can follow them. And it's about also the leading by examples.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and how can leaders provide the necessary support to teams while still allowing room for innovation and experimentation?
So I touched upon this a little bit really already. It's about taking an empowering approach and giving those that at child level that need to align into a parent's OKR, giving them the space with which to come up with those ideas, work through those ideas, and draft up some OKRs. So the support is giving them the space, making sure that they have the necessary skills, the necessary resources, that they fully understand what it is at parent level that they need to align into, the challenge that presents to them, and that gives them room for hopefully, if the levels of psychological safety are healthy enough, to give them room to develop those ideas and craft them as OKRs. It just to kind of put some context around that, though, another aspect of culture which comes about as a result of that psychological safety is is what we call test, learn, and adapt. So if people feel safe enough to take a measured risk, not a reckless risk, but a measured risk, to try out something new, a new way of solving a challenge that perhaps has been there for a while, that's the experimentation. We can test something out, and then we can learn from that, and then we can adapt as a result. Irrespective of whether it's been successful or not, we adapt as a result so that the performance improves the next time round. And that's the beauty of OKRs, the cyclical nature. So if there's permission for experimentation and testing, that's really really important. And OKRs work phenomenally well when they're used for that, when they're used for testing and experimentation. I mean, it's interesting because there are some organizations that have really harnessed them for innovation. Like Booking.com, for instance, they have an OKR toolkit on their intranet, and anyone in the organization has permission to download that and actually create an OKR which they can work on locally. That doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be aligned to the strategic priorities. Yes, they use OKRs for that, but those are the aligned ones. These are the unaligned ones. These are the ones which they're kind of like, you know, a team might have an idea about what they could do to make something better. So they start off, they frame it as an OKR, and they get cracking. And that's how you can kind of really harness them for empowering innovation.
Certainly, Roger. Leaders can provide support by offering resources, giving them space, removing obstacles, and creating a safe space for teams to experiment and take calculated risks. It's about finding a balance between accountability and freedom to innovate. Also, as we are now delving into the realm of OKRs, it's vital to recognize that employee engagement plays a vital role. Engaged employees are more likely to drive the achievement of key results. So, how can organizations keep their employee engaged and motivated throughout the OKR cycle?
So there's a few things which they can do here. First of all, they can make it as easy as possible to do this. And you'll love it, because I'm going to say they should be using a system. Okay, because without that, if they're trying to just wing it using spreadsheets, it will become really difficult, because it'll look great on day one, but then a couple of weeks in, it'll look like a right mess. It'll be difficult to update, difficult to get any sort of data out of, unless you've got someone that's gone and created this really sophisticated, massively engineered spreadsheet with lots of macros and so on and so forth in it. Why would you do that? Why would you not just use a system which has all that built into it? So I would say, first of all, make it as easy as possible. Yeah, and the beauty as well of using a system is that all the data is in one place. Once you've done your updates, no one then has to report to senior management, because senior management can just look at the system, get the reporting out of the system that they need, and that's that. So it actually streamlines the process from that side. So yeah, making it easy helps with engagement. The second thing is making sure that people have all the necessary skills, that they feel that they've been able to build up the right level of competency. Even though OKRs are, dare I say, a simple concept, it's amazing just how complicated they can become very quickly. So keeping it as simple as possible and not over-engineering the way that you're going to use OKRs in the organization. Don't have too many. Don't have too many. Too many is the killer. Quantity, a high quantity can be the killer of OKRs, because that increases it. First of all, it dilutes the focus, and secondly, it increases the workload in terms of what needs to be realigned every quarter and so on and so forth. So you've got to make sure that the process is delivering more value than the resources it consumes. Yeah. And if it consumes a lot of time and resource to realign every quarter, then people will start to question the value of the process. And in terms of motivation, I mean, it's particularly in the early stages, it's really important to have for the teams to have somebody working alongside them who is perhaps a bit more familiar with the process than they are at that stage. And this is where OKR coaches come in to play. A very big part of what we do is to train up coaches. We don't just do implementations, but we train up coaches to support those implementations and make sure that OKRs are sustained in our client organizations. And so that's really important to sort of hold the hand of new teams who are experiencing OKRs for the first time. And then I would also say recognize, there needs to be recognition at the end of the quarter. Celebrate the successes, but also celebrate the learning as well. And I deliberately didn't say failure there. Deliberately didn't say failure. The learning may arise as a result of something that's missed. So strictly speaking, that could be considered a failure. But it's the learning and the adaptation which is what really should be focused on. And yes, you've got the achievement, great, but where did we fall short, and what's happening as a result of that, and what difference has that made? That's what should be celebrated as well, because that is evidence of ongoing improvement in performance, and that's what we're looking for. That's what we're looking for. So yeah, make sure that you're recognizing those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved what you said, that celebrating the success and learning from the failures. Yeah. So thank you, Roger, for an enlightenment session. Now it's time for the Q&A segment. We have already received few questions, and for those participants who still have inquiries, please feel free to share your questions in the available chat box. So, Roger, shall we begin with the first question?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, okay. So we have our first question. How can organizations conduct effective post-cycle reviews to learn from successes and failures?
Okay, so that would be the end of a quarter or the end of a year, I guess. How can you conduct it? So my question back would be, are you asking about a specific agenda? What are the things that should be covered? If so, and I hope that's what you mean, then I would say that you need to be obviously covering off the scoring of the current set of OKRs. So understanding where you finished and what that means for what it was that you were aiming for, and there's and capturing the learning in that, because even if you hit it, particularly if you were trying something new and you hit the result that you wanted to hit, there's learning in that. So it's great, we've hit it. What can we do to make sure that we hit it next month? What's the learning in this? And then there's learning, obviously, if you overachieve, and then there's learning if you fall short as well. So it's about making sure that that learning comes from it, and the retrospective practice that is required to sort of identify and capture that learning, and then play that forward. If you're looking at if it's a quarterly reset, then what you should be doing is not just taking your input from what's been achieved in the quarter that's just finished. You need to be kind of judging that against what the 12-month OKRs are, and then asking, okay, what should we be focusing on for the next 3 months? Sometimes it means that the current objective, maybe it's spanning more than 3 months. They often do. So it's a case of rolling that objective forward, but then setting new key results for it. If it's a 12-month reset, then you're looking obviously at what's been achieved in the previous 12 months, but then assessing that against the longer term, sort of usually three-year strategic goals for the business and deciding what needs to be the focus for the next year. What I would just say in both those situations is, I mean, I'm talking very general here because obviously, you know, we can't really get into huge amounts of detail on a webinar, but as a rule of thumb, we try to encourage our clients to actually start the planning for the next phase before the current phase is finished, because otherwise they end up losing too much time from the new phase when it started, and they haven't got any OKRs to be working with at that point. So there's always going to be a little bit of downtime in between the two periods, but it definitely pays dividends to start the planning and the drafting of the next set of OKRs, so that you have them ready to either run with or revise and then run with when the new period starts.
Thanks, Roger. We have our second question. Can organizations employ strategies to sustain OKR commitment and momentum over the long term?
Yes. I think I mentioned one of them, which is make sure that you build up an internal body of expertise, which usually takes the form of coaches. So even if you're just a small organization, even if you're a small business, you still need somebody who's kind of the subject matter expert. And I'd always say you have a minimum of two, so that you've got redundancy if one if one's on holiday or one leaves, then you're not left without that knowledge and expertise. They're really important in helping to kind of support the OKR teams as they're working through, but also to help facilitate the creating of the next set of OKRs and the transition between periods. So that's really important. In terms of sustaining it, I would say, I think the most important is that leadership are using it visibly. That the OKRs become commonplace in company updates, in conversations, and it becomes part of the organizational operating system. It's not something that's just managed separately. It's actually part of the flow. It's not managed above the flow or out of the flow. It's actually part of the flow of regular activity within the organization. And a big, like I say, a big way of getting that is to set the tone and set an example with leadership being visible about their own OKRs, and also taking a very active interest in OKRs, other OKRs across the business.
Thanks, Roger. We have another question. How can organizations ensure that geographically dispersed teams stay connected to the OKR process and its goal?
Oh, well, that is an interesting one, because obviously you've got the challenge of time zones coming into play there. Yeah, this is where, and this is actually a challenge which I'm facing with the design of the governance framework for this client I'm working with at the moment. And we're looking at different time zones and what that means for the scheduling of, in particular, of check-ins, because they're the most frequent of OKR ceremonies. And it's ideally what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that the teams all cross over in some way, shape, or form in terms of time zones. Sometimes that's not possible, and unavoidably it's meaning that some people are having to kind of do half-hour calls outside perhaps their normal working day, but you try not to make it, you know, well, I mean, we'd never make it the middle of the night, of course, because that's just unfair, and it's not right. So there's no secret. I guess what I'm saying is there is no secret answer to this. There's no silver bullet. you've got to be sympathetic about the time zones. You've got to try and create the teams, build the teams up that are going to hopefully overlap at some point in the working day. And you need to be using a system, because the backup is if they can't be talking, or if for some reason somebody misses out on a check-in or something like that, then they can provide updates through the system. Excuse me. They can you know, all the systems provide opportunity to put in comments and to flag people, to bring their attention to it, and so on and so forth. So that's the right thing to do. When it comes to the end of a quarter and you've got to do the aligning, this is where, again, it depends on the distribution of people across different time zones. But we should be looking for, if it's possible, I know it's not always possible, but a lot of our clients, when it gets to the end of the quarter, actually try to bring people together face to face. Although it will work if you do it on video. You just have to structure it differently. You have to start earlier. And by earlier, I don't mean earlier in the day. I mean earlier in the quarter, because you can't, or I certainly don't find it productive to kind of, you know, lock yourself away on video for a couple of days solid and work like that. No, it needs to be broken down into smaller, more manageable chunks of maybe, you know, an hour and a half to 2 hours at a time. And so that takes longer. So you've got to plan that in, and account for that.
Thanks, Roger. We have our last question from our audience. Transitioning from traditional goal setting methods can be challenging. What advice do you have for organizations making this shift to avoid disruption?
Okay. Yes, it can be challenging. It often is. I would say don't jump into OKRs with both feet. Take a pilot-led approach. Start to use it in a part of the organization. We quite often use a T-shaped pilot with clients. So you've got the top of the T is to develop OKRs at organizational level. So that's the broad application of them. And then the column of the T is where you decide, just for the pilot, you deploy them into one particular area of, like I said, value flow in the organization, which you'll use as your pilot. And you can leverage that for a few things. You can get value out of it for the learning. You can get value out of it for the way that you can communicate and also market it, promote it to the rest of the organization, because it's a really powerful message if you have people who are already hands-on and using OKRs saying to the rest of the organization, this has really made a difference for us. We've seen much better communication, much better collaboration. We personally are feeling like we're achieving a lot more as a result of it. So that's really important, that you perhaps you start with a pilot, so you're not expecting everybody to get on board at the same time. And we often see the energy change around OKRs once a pilot has been done, because the energy at first, if you try and get the whole of the organization to take them on at once, that's a very push energy. We're doing this, you've got to get on board. If you do a pilot, first of all, that's when the rest of the organization gets to see, what's going on over there. They seem to be doing things slightly differently. Oh, there's, you know, and they start to hear some good stories coming out of it. And that's when you start to get the questions like, when are we doing that? Are we going to be doing that? How are we going to do that? And the energy becomes more of a pull than a push, and that's far better for adoption and for it to stick, for it to be sustained.
Thank you, Roger, once again for sharing your expertise and insights with us today. We truly appreciate your valuable contribution, and I'm also sure our audience has gained a deeper understanding of the power of OKRs and how they can navigate and avoid these pitfalls. Your wisdom has undoubtedly inspired us all. And to our wonderful audience, thank you for joining us today. Your engagement and enthusiasm make events like these even more rewarding. We hope you found this session both informative and inspiring. Thank you. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Manisha.